right, thank you. So welcome everyone. Bienvenue à vous tous. So good evening everyone. My name is Luisa Daruca and I'm the workshop chair tonight. So I'm very excited about tonight's workshop. We have Alain Guillot with us who will be presenting how to start a successful podcast. So Alain has been a member of McGill Toastmaster Club for the past 6 years. 2 years ago, he started Alain Guillot podcast. It's a 30 to 45 minute show devoted to personal development and entrepreneurship. And by the end of this workshop, Alain would have 120 podcasts. So that's very impressive. So before we jump right in, I'd like to introduce the team helping us on the line tonight. So we have Greg Sr. and Gabrielle Duguay, who will help us on the technical support if needs be. And of course, they're helping us as we go along. So without further ado, let's welcome everybody, Alain Guillot, who will be presenting his workshop, How to Start a Successful Podcast. Thank you, Alain.
Thank you, Luisa, for the introduction, and thank you, Gabrielle. First of all, I would like to tell you a little bit about me. Well, as Luisa said, I'm part of the McGill Toastmasters. I have been there for about 6 years now. It started when I took a 1 year sabbatical. I sold my business and I was just contemplating what to do with my life, and Toastmasters came into my life. So since then, I've been trying to improve myself, improve my public speaking skills, and somewhere along the way, I stumbled also upon podcasting. So today, as Luisa just mentioned, I will talk about how to start a podcast and how to reach millions of people with our voice and stories. So yes, two and a half years ago, I started publishing my first podcast. And why did I start doing that? First of all, I wanted to build an audience. I wanted to reach people. I have been listening to podcasts already for about 10 years. And every time that I listen to a podcast, I build a little bit of a desire to maybe one day start doing my own. And the fact that I was going to Toastmasters meeting and improving my speaking skills, that encouraged me to get started. Also, podcasting have helped me a lot to improve my speaking. As you notice, I have a Spanish accent, and I have been having a lot of maybe inferiority complex because of my accent. But podcasting have just helped me break every barrier there is in my mind. And the other reason why I started a podcast is because I wanted to have conversation with influential people. One thing that is amazing about podcasting is that I can just send an email to someone and I can say, hey, Joe, congratulations for the book that you just wrote. Congratulations for being invited to TED Talks. Congratulations for this amazing business deal that you did. Do you mind speaking about it in my podcast? And you know what? Most of the time they say, no problem. My success rate when I approach people is about 50%. And since then, I have spoken to all kinds of authors, business leaders, politicians, athletes, you name it. I have spoken to anyone who I think can contribute some positive message to my audience. And that is practically my modus operandi. I just write in an email and they generally say yes, and we record it. So Luisa just mentioned that I will have recorded my 120th episode, but no, in fact, a few days ago, I recorded 137th episode. So that's a lot of episodes. What can I reach with my podcast? My podcast that started from nowhere. Okay, so from right now, I have 16,000 downloads in my podcast, which started 2 years ago. That means I record one episode per week. So that means that I have about 250 people listening to my podcast. So as a person who wants to get better public speaking, imagine speaking in front of an audience of 250 people. Well, that's more or less what I do every week. I speak to an audience of 200, 250 people, and the feeling is just amazing. So, first of all, I like to just go a little bit back and just mention exactly what is a podcast. The way I see a podcast is like a wedding between Netflix and regular radio. So that means in Netflix, or one time when you wanted to watch a TV show, you had to be there at 6 o'clock to watch, or 7 o'clock, or 8 o'clock to watch the regular programming. And there was no way around it, okay? But Netflix came along, and then you could watch your favorite TV show at whatever time of the day or night as you wanted. Time didn't have was not a problem anymore. You could watch 20 shows, or you could watch just one, or whatever. You became the king of your own programming. Well, podcast is more or less the same. I can listen now to my favorite radio show whenever I want to. I don't have to wait until 6 o'clock in the morning to listen to the 6 o'clock radio show, or 7 o'clock at night. It is basically whenever I want to. And what it is that podcast is basically a an audio file stored in the cloud somewhere, and then through a phone or to a computer, I can have access to those files. So I could, let's say I fall in love with a particular podcaster, and I can listen to all his repertoire in one weekend, for example. And, it's just me who decides when and how to listen to each one of those podcasts. Now, in regards to Toastmasters, what is the position of Toastmasters in regards to podcasting? Well, for one, Toastmasters International has their own podcast. It's called the Toastmasters Podcast. So if you're interested in knowing what's happening in Toastmasters as an organization by itself, you can just look into your favorite podcasting platform and look for the Toastmasters podcast. So that's how much importance Toastmasters International gives to podcasting. In addition, in the Pathway program on level 4, speech number 2, it says create a podcast. So we are incentivized to create our own podcast. And according to what I read from the Pathway program, we are supposed to create a 60-minute podcast and then do a presentation of the things that we learn creating that podcast. Now, what is the advantage of a podcast versus other means of communications? Let's say TV or a book or blogs or whatever. The main advantage of a podcast is that a person, a listener like you, like me, we don't have to allocate any time in particular to listen to a podcast. Why? Because a podcast is something that we listen to while we are doing other activities. For example, I listen to most of my podcasts while I'm walking outside. I listen to most of my podcasts while I'm driving. I listen to most of my podcasts while I'm doing my exercise. So there is not let's say a 20-minute spot in my calendar to listen to a podcast. No, podcasts, I do it for several hours per week, yet it doesn't occupy one single second in my agenda. And that is the great advantage of podcasts versus other means of communication. If you decide to read a book, you certainly cannot drive and read a book at the same time. Or if you watch a YouTube video, you certainly cannot do you, go outside, walk your dog and look at a YouTube video. But with podcasts, it just owns the whole arena, the arena of the other thing that you are doing while you're doing your principal activity, which could be walking, exercising, driving, doing the laundry, dishes, any one of those things. So that is the amazing thing about podcasting. Now, I encourage people to um, to try to explore into podcasting as a means of communication. Why podcasting? Well, let's say you want to share your message with the world. Let's say you are, I don't know, you are the owner of an enterprise, or you are an author and you would like to build on an audience. Okay, let's take that example. Let's say you are an author, you want to release a book next year, and you want to start building an audience. Okay, so if you start a blog, a website, in order to build a relationship with your audience, you are competing against 1.5 other million bloggers out there. That is a lot of competition. That is a lot of noise in the internet. In order to make yourself known, it's just going to require a lot of time, patience, and it's just going to be difficult to differentiate yourself among 1.5 billion other blogs. If you decide to start a YouTube channel, well, first of all, a YouTube channel, it requires a lot of hardware, lights, cameras, space, all these things, and there are already 2 million YouTube channels out there. So you have a lot of competition, and it's going to require a lot of physical things. However, if you decide to start a podcast, okay, there is less than 1 million podcasts out there in the world, and out of that 1 million podcasts, about half of that, half a million, are active, because the other half, they probably have started a podcast and they have abandoned it along the way. Okay, so if you decide to start a podcast, there is a lot of room to grow. There's a lot of space, and you will practically have no competition. If you would like to speak, let's say, about business, well, sure, there are a lot of business podcasts out there, but when you compare yourself against websites about business, wow, you have a lot of room to grow. How do people listen to podcasts? Okay, most people, I'm just gonna bring my phone here. Most people listen to podcasts through their phones. They have usually some kind of podcasting application in their phone, and then in that application, they are notified when their favorite podcaster publish a new episode, and then they listen to it. And most listeners have they listen to 10 different podcasts, so every day they have something fresh to listen to. But also there are other mediums, like, for example, Pandora, Spotify, and then there is Apple Podcasts, there is Google Podcasts, there is all kind of ways. And then if that's not enough, then there is the computer. People can listen to the podcast through their computers. And now there are all these other speaker devices like Alexa, Google Home, all these other things. And even in your car, many cars already come with a podcast application. So podcast is just available everywhere. However, about 60%, and I don't know the reason for this, but about 60% of podcast listeners, they do it through the application called Apple Podcasts. Perhaps it's because right from the beginning, Apple has been a champion of podcasting, and they have put it in all their iPhones, and 60% of podcast listeners, they do it through the Apple Podcast application, which is immense. It is incredible, considering all the other forms that you can listen to a podcast. Now, let's say that you, a Toastmaster member, you decide to start a podcast, and then you ask yourself, what kind of audience can I expect? Well, as I told you a minute ago, my audience is around, 250 listeners per episode. But of course, I already have 2 years, and my audience have been building up little by little. And the average, I'm going to tell you statistically, what can you expect? So in statistics, there is something called the median and the average. So in the median, if you have a straight line right in the middle, that's called the median. And in podcasting, the median will be about 150 downloads per episode. So if you start a podcast today, within a year, the median, if you are somewhere close to the median, you will have around 150 downloads per episode. Now the average is much higher, and the average is about 1,500 downloads per episode. And why is that? Well, so this is my line. Usually there is a kind of like a bell curve, but in podcasting it's skewed to the right. So there's like uh, the biggest amount are at the far right, and because there are some podcasts that have huge audiences. There is one that I'm going to speak about in a minute that has an audience of 190 million downloads per episode. So yeah, so that one in particular is called the Joe Rogan podcast, which he is in the news today because he just signed a partnership with Spotify, and he's getting paid $100 million in royalties for his podcast. Now, you know, this guy, Joe Rogan, is an average guy, just like you and me. He's been at it for over 10 years. He has episodes of about 2 hours long, and he is earning with not much than a microphone and a computer software and a camera, because he also does video. He's earning about $30 million per year, okay? In this medium of communication that he costs almost nothing at all, this guy is earning 30 million. Of course, it requires talent, endurance, perseverance, and having something interesting to say. But, you know, it's just amazing that with those tools, a microphone, and an internet connection, someone could be earning such a nice amount of money just by having conversation with interesting individuals. So let's say that you would like to start a podcast. What would you need? Okay, so the first thing that you need is, of course, a recording device. And if you already have a smartphone, then you already have a recording device. Most smartphones, they have a voice recording device. And basically, all you have to do is just activate that voice recording device and just start speaking to your microphone. That will create an MP3 file or an audio file, which you can upload, like Greg is going to be doing with this video. He's going to upload it somewhere. Well, it's the same thing with an audio file. It's going to be uploaded somewhere in the cloud, so it can be accessible to the rest of us. The other thing that is necessary is an audio software. And I'm going to share with you my audio software. If I can just see how, okay. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to, this is my audio software here. Let's see, share. Okay, so here's my audio software. Okay, now I'm going to record something. Hello, this is the Alain Guillot podcast. Today we're experimenting on how to do a podcast. One of the biggest problems that people have in podcasts, as in public speaking, is that they do the and quite often. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the recording. Now listen to this. Here I see the and ums that I say. I'm gonna play it. Okay, and I can edit that out. So I can just come here and edit, and come here and edit that. Imagine if you are doing a speech, a Toastmaster, and somehow you could edit out your ams and ums and all these other vocal crutches that you have. That would be amazing. Well, we have that in podcasting. We can just record all that out. So that okay, I'm going to now, what is it? I'm going to share my slides if I can find them. Okay, here. So what does it take? Okay, so we were speaking about recording device. So we spoke about your phone. Another thing, of course, if you want to go more professional, then a microphone like this. This microphone cost me about $100. But you can get a very nice microphone for about $40. And I recommend one in particular. It's called the Samsung Q2U. And that one in particular, that one costs what? About $60. So you have the microphone, you need the audio software, and the audio software, we have two alternatives. There is this duality, Apple versus Mac. If you are a Mac user, most of Mac users prefer something called GarageBand. And if you are a PC user, well, most PC users prefer this Audacity, which is the software that I just show you here. So, and it's completely free. This is the amazing thing, that all these tools that we use, they are free. We already have a phone, most of us, and this software is free. So what else do we need? We need a hosting account. Okay, so now hosting is where we keep this podcast in the cloud. And we have two alternatives. There is the free alternative. And, so far as I know, the free alternative working just fine. The thing is that because it's free, I don't trust it, okay? I don't trust it because I don't know what they're going to do with all my episodes. And I don't know if they will go broke, because as far as I know, a free business plan doesn't last for long. So I don't use the free one. I use another one. My host provider is called Libsyn, and they have plans starting at $5 per month. So in order for me to keep all my 137 episodes in the cloud accessible to everyone, I pay more than that right now, but anyone can get started with $5 a month. Okay, so I spoke about Apple Podcasts. Is the most popular podcasting application out there. 60% of listeners use this application. Now, how to grow a podcast? Okay, so sure, I get a microphone, I record my voice, I upload it. How to grow it? How to get hundreds of people to listen to it? This is, I believe, is the most difficult part. And the thing is that it requires consistency, like becoming a good speaker at Toastmasters. If you go there every day, if you are consistent, if you practice, and if you take roles every week, you will have no choice but to get better. Well, with podcasting is the same. If you are there every week, and if you develop some listeners, then you will be yes. So there is someone. Your Pieza say that he used Anchor, and that's what I mean. Just say, listen, they are free, but I don't understand their business model, so I don't know for how long it's going to stay free. Me, to stay on the safe side, I rather pay $5 per month. I know that I'm gonna have I feel safer. So another question is, can you make money through podcasting? The answer is yes. Okay, so of course, ideally, you will develop an audience first before you start thinking about how to make money. But let's say that's our end game. Eventually, we would like to make money with our podcast. Then what are the alternatives? Well, the most popular alternative is to sell advertising spots. For example, in the middle of the podcast, I could say, well, this podcast has been sponsored by Amazon. Amazon provides service at all the cities, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so the advertising is the most popular way that people earns money through podcasting, but also affiliate marketing. So, for example, I just mentioned Libsyn, which is my host. So whenever someone use my link to get their own podcast through this host, I get a small commission. So that's a legitimate way to make money through podcasting. Another thing is, let's say I develop a huge platform and somebody else wants to advertise their business product or service in my podcast, I can charge that person to interview him in my podcast. I said, hey, you want to talk about your new release book? To have access to my audience, it costs you $200. I'm just making that up. Or another way is to sell a product or service. So let's say after each podcast episode, I said, okay, everyone, I offer a course on how to create your own podcast. If you are interested, it's only $9.99, and just click on, go to my website and buy it. It's in a special right now. And the last way to support your podcast is through subscriptions or donations. There is a sponsorship. There's all, you can ask for people just to donate money. And a lot of people do that, and they do it successfully. Then, should you start your own podcast? Well, my answer to that is yes. If you want to become a better speaker, what a great opportunity to have an audience that goes there every week to listen to you, and that you prepare the whatever is it that you want to talk about, and then you have an audience to express to share those ideas with. Another thing, for example, when I started Toastmasters, I was super crazy about entrepreneurship. Okay, and I did almost my 10 first speeches about entrepreneurship, but I noticed my audience, my Toastmaster audience, was getting uh, tired of the same subject. But with podcasting, if my whole podcast is about entrepreneurship, then everybody else who's not interested in entrepreneurship is not there. So I don't have to worry about boring somebody to death about a subject that I'm passionate about, but they may not be passionate about. So podcasting will help you become a better speaker. It will allow you to speak about the things that you are passionate about, and that you and this a select group of people that are passionately about this subject only, okay, not about everything else. The other thing is the cost is negligible. As I mentioned, you can get started with, I don't know, a microphone, $50, and a hosting service, $5 per month, or even free. So yeah, the cost is almost not there. And then you can connect with people that you admire. So let's say I'm in the entrepreneurship realm. Then I get to talk to people that I admire and send them emails and say, would you like to be my podcast? And many people say yes. So this is amazing. So that's it for my presentation. I'm going to open it to questions.
I think one of the question was, what's the hosting account you're using?
Okay, so hosting account is Libsyn. I'm going to just write it to everyone. And by the way, I can share these slides with everyone in this audience, but I'm going to just Libsyn is called Libsyn. So I just type in the name of the hosting that I use. It's called Libsyn, and it's not it's not expensive at all. It can get started with $5 per month.
So we have some people who wrote, some of our colleagues here who wrote some questions on the chat box. So how do you structure your podcast to get interest with your audience? So for example, do you prepare ahead of time, like a structure or questions? No. Do you send them stuff ahead of time? So please walk us through how you do it.
Okay, so yes, great question. So usually I ask for so there are several kinds of podcasts. Mine in particular is an interview kind of podcast. So I approach someone and we have a conversation. But many other people prefer to do a monologue and speak about what is the thing that they are passionate about. So I found that a little bit challenging, So, and I thought that I could create more interesting content just by interviewing people. And the way that I structure it is basically, let's say I'm interested in doing a podcast with, I don't know, there's a person here in the audience. Her name is Alan, Anna. Let's say Anna is a writer. Okay, she's a well-known writer, and I say, Anna, can you do you mind coming to my podcast? And she says, sure, Alain, no problem. So then what I do is that I go to Anna's website and I try to read about everything that she's up to. I try to go to her social media and see the things that are relevant to her. If she has written a book, I would try. I read about one book per week, and so this is in preparation for the podcast that I do. So in the process of all this research, I'm writing on a piece of paper questions that come to my mind as I'm reading. And of course, the first question that I generally ask is, hello, Anna, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what is it that you do? So that opens a huge door and for Anna to tell us about the things that are important to her. And I try to ask open-ended questions in order to let the guests express themselves as much as they want to. So in the case of Anna, let's say she just wrote a book about how to be a successful speaker. So she will go and she will say, okay, well, when I was a little girl, I was shy, but then I got into some speaking competitions and I broke my barrier of fear. And since then, I've been speaking all over the place. And now I wrote this book. Okay, so that we would have this conversation in the span of about half an hour. Of course, I'll be asking questions, and the whole thing will be mostly like a conversation. So sure, I do my research. I have a whole bunch of questions in my notebook, but if she opens the door for another thing that I find interesting, for example, let's say, well, I wrote about, I became interested in public speaking because I used to have some kind of impediment and I couldn't speak to people and I was shy or whatever and I had a psychological barrier. Then she's opening the door for me to go deeper into this. And this is something that sometimes annoys me about other podcasts, is that the guests open a wide door into a subject that many times in my head I see as interesting, and many times the host don't go to that door. So I have my questions, but I'm also flexible to the gift that the guest is giving me.
Thank you so much, Alain, for sharing. That's a very great insights. So we have more questions here. There's one here asking, how do you actually reach out to people? How do you, like, what's your approach? And I mean, it could be intimidating. So I know you talked about sending an email, but what do you do?
Okay, so yes, it is intimidating, but I have a small secret. Okay, so I try to approach people who are in the process of promoting a something. So let's say someone is promoting their new business, or someone is promoting their new book or their new movie. So uh, um, I spend some time in social media just trying to be aware of who is promoting what. But as a tool that I use quite often is that I go into Amazon, into the book sessions, and in the book session they have a little segment of books coming up somewhere in the near future, coming up next month, in the next 2-3 months. And I know for a fact that those authors, they want to get the word out about their book. So if I see, I continue using Anna, if I see that Anna, her book is going to come out in 2 months and is already on the pre-order stage in Amazon, I'm sure she would like to talk about it as much as I can. And then perhaps one of the promises that I give to Anna is that, Anna, I will try to publish and release this podcast on the same week as your book is being release. And with that formula, I have managed to speak to famous New York Times bestseller authors, many, probably about 20 of them, who are world known in their field of finance or entrepreneurship or whatever, and they had already many successful New York Times seller books just by approaching them at a moment that they desire to be approached.
So thank you so much for your generosity, because you're sharing your secrets with us. So thank you very much. Here's another question. How do you come up with 137 different topics to chat about? So yes, you go on Amazon and you find, you know, who wants to be promoted in a way, but other topics, how do you come up with all these topics?
Okay, so I'll tell you some interesting topics. And this, I don't come up with them. I just find the people who are promoting something. But listen to this one. I was speaking about the bodyguard industry, and I found a female bodyguard who had an amazing story. This female bodyguard, she had a rescue operation. She had to go to Afghanistan and rescue a woman who was kidnapped and taken by force to Afghanistan and converted into a sex slave. So my guest went to Afghanistan, put a burqa on from head to toe, and of course she was wearing guns and grenades and all this and that. She broke into the place where the person that she was supposed to save was hiding, and she rescued this person. It's a complete movie Rambo scene, and her story is so interesting that Netflix just did a series about last year, a series about her life. Okay, but this woman was trying to promote her story. I found out about it, and this is a huge successful story. I'm going to publish next week the story of this painter who is completely 100% blind. And he is an amazing painter. He has such a colorful portraits and drawings and all that. He has developed a feel for the colors. And with that, he can just paint. And we were having a conversation, and he showed me through, because we did a Zoom call, and he was showing me his painting and more or less the process for him to feel the texture and do those paintings. So, I just survey the internet for interesting story every week, and it's not me who come up with the story, it's me who find the guests who have the interesting story to share.
So one here, it's how do we access your podcast? So I guess it's promotion time now.
Okay, so my name is Alain Guillot, and if you just type Alain Guillot, the first 3 pages in Google are about my podcast. So yeah, just type my name, and you will be able to find all these episodes, 137 episodes. Yeah.
Sorry for cutting you. I wanted to say I did the test. I typed in your name, and you're the first one that came up.
Oh, yes. By the way, I'm also an SEO expert, which is search engine optimization. So if any one of you have a business and you want to have in page number 1 on Google, you can ask me as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. So here's a few other questions. How do you find followers? So, okay, you do your podcast, but how do you get people to know about your podcast and to come and watch it?
Wow. Okay. So that's very difficult. So there's a strategy for that. Of course, the first few podcasts I used to beg people to listen to my podcast. I created business cards, and I used to distribute it around the club. But I don't know, you probably cannot see it. Anyways, I had business card, and I used to beg people to listen to my podcast. But what I found more efficient. So once again, let's say I interview this famous person, whatever their name is, and I go through the process of editing and publishing the podcast in their website. And then once I publish, then I say, by the way, Anna, if you don't mind, I spent 10 hours preparing this podcast. It would mean a world to me if you just share it with your social media. Now, mind you that I'm usually approaching people who are already famous, and when they share in their, I don't know, Twitter, LinkedIn, Amazon, I mean, no, Facebook, the podcast that they just did with me. Hey, I just did a podcast with the Alain Guillot show. Here's the link. When they share it, I'm being now exposed to thousands of people. So that is how they actually, my guests help me grow my audience.
Awesome. Thank you. So here it says, how long on average are your podcasts?
Okay, so this is many people think that a podcast has to have a particular length, and the ideal length of a podcast is as long as it's interesting. So just because someone says, oh, I would like to have a 20-minute podcast, if the conversation is so interesting, let's say if I get in my podcast Obama and he wants to speak for about an hour, I'm not going to tell him, Mr. Obama, stop. This is only a 20-minute podcast. No, I'm going to let him speak as long as he wants. But most of my podcasts, they are between 30 to 45 minutes. I think that's a way in which in the Toast storytelling format, we could have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion without feeling that you have to extend or compress a conversation.
So it's a bit like us. It's 30, 45 minutes.
Yes.
So we have here questions of a suggestion / question. Is it possible, like, let's say for you to give your information ahead of time to authors so that when they write in the future books that they reach out directly to you? Kind of like be proactive.
Well, I have established already relationships. So whenever some of them write a book, they send me a message and they ask me if I can interview them. But what works even better is to develop relationship with publishing houses. So there are people whose whole profession is to promote their authors. For example, if I get one of those connections, then that person will say, hey, you know, so and so and so and so and so and so. There's usually an immense list of people who are always promoting things, and there's such an abundance, and I didn't know this, but I get hundreds of free books every month. Well, not hundred, but I get free books all the time from different publishing houses sending me their books for me to consider to interview their clients.
So I think there's maybe one or two left. It's kind of, one is, can it be used as a source of revenue, which I think you talked about it a bit, and it's linked to another question that came 2 times, I think. Is that the only positions, like, kind of job that you do, or is there other things you do? And I think you talked about it briefly. So yes, well, go ahead.
I don't earn that much money through podcasting. I just to share the economics of podcasting, let's say the most popular way is through advertisement. So through advertisement is the general cost, or the pay for that is about $50 for every 1,000 listeners. So I don't have the audience. My audience is not big enough to sustain my podcast. However, because I interview so many people and so many people connect to my website has certain, it's called domain authority. And because my website has certain domain authority, there are people who are willing to buy advertising space in my website. So in an indirect way, I do make some money from my podcast, but actually my podcasting is not a money-making enterprise.
Thank you. And it's a great way for people to know you, and even for Toastmasters, for us to reach out to you.
Thank you. Yes.
So I think there's one last question. How much time do you spend preparing and interviewing? Like, that's very interesting, because, like, how much time does it take you, to get the work done?
Okay, so just reading someone's book is a long time. So it had to be someone that I'm interested in order for, just 200 pages takes a long time. But in addition to that, the whole process can take me around 10 hours. So doing my research, going to the website, social media, etc., writing my notes, doing the preparation to recording, then editing the podcast, and then after editing, creating the notes in the my website, and then publishing and promoting all that to social media. There are easily 10 hours of work for each episode, and that is basically the major disadvantage for a podcast, is that it's very time consuming. But let's say that my podcast was a money making enterprise, and let's say I was making, I don't know, just go a number, $2,000 per episode. Okay, now I will have the budget for somebody else to do the editing, the note taking, the pushing, promoting, and this and that. So it could be a lot lighter, the workload, if I had some help, but I don't. As I say, my podcast doesn't make me any money, but it's giving me so many doors, opportunities to speak in many places, and to meet amazing people. And the fact that my public speaking is getting better by being forced to speak to people that I love and respect every week is just a great incentive to continue improving myself.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you, Alain. Honestly, for me, like I'm speaking for myself, and let me put the camera on. Like for me, I'm fully inspired. I think for all of us, you're an inspiration. You're helping us, think beyond what we're already doing right now. Maybe some of us are already doing podcasts. I know about Pinterest. I know about Instagram. I knew a little bit about podcasts. So for me, you really opened my eyes to podcasts. You made it look really easy to actually implement. For sure, it's a lot of work to see the results, but at the same time, we all work hard towards concrete results. So eventually, those concrete results will come in. So thank you so much for your time, for sharing, your secrets and sharing your expertise and letting us know your website. So we're going to further go into your website and keep in touch with you. So thank you very much for your presentation today. It was very, very insightful.
So one last comment, as I mentioned, in Pathway, there's this in level 4, project 2, it says podcast. So if anyone ever needs some help on how to do that for that particular project, feel free to send me an email, and I can help you. I'll be delighted to be of help to any Toastmaster member.
Thank you very much. So thank you all. My apologies for going a bit over. It was very interesting, Alain. So I wanted to make sure we capture all of these questions. So thank you again for joining and being part of this. We're very grateful. Thank you everyone for joining today.